Coming up on this episode of The Mechanics of Transportation, it's all about some Virginia bike bills that fared well in the current session of the 2026 General Assembly session, and one bill that, after 5 years of trying to get passed, failed in one particular committee. Failed again. My guest is John Hamilton, current president of the Virginia Bicycling Federation, which is part of the National Group League of American Bicyclists. The VBF advocates to get bills passed to make cycling safe, among other things like working to help create safe multi-use trails like Virginia's Capitol Trail. John and I talk about the Bicyclist Safety Bill, HB 661, which you can read about on VBF's website. A link is in the show notes. But first, please be sure to share this podcast on all your social media apps and be sure to give it a thumbs up wherever you happen to listen to it. And if you want to watch this discussion and others like it, check out Ian Stewart Cycles on YouTube, which the link is also in the show notes. Hey, look at that. Now here's my conversation with VBF President John Hamilton. John, just tell me your name and title and kind of how this relates to what we're going to talk about.
Sure. Yeah, I'm John Hamilton. Last year became president of the Virginia Bicycling Federation.
And how long has the the VBF been around?
It's about 30 years. So, it's been a good long length of time. A local legend, Bud Vai, was heavily involved with the Virginia Bicycling Federation, and they were all heavily involved in getting the Cap-to-Cap Trail.
Yeah. And just to give people a synopsis of what VBF does, what does VBF do in a nutshell? It's a lot. You guys do a lot.
Yeah, this is where I should pull up my canned speeches. Essentially, we're a bicycle safety, promote the use of bicycles and safe use, and that has resulted in multiple years of working with the Virginia State Legislature to try to get some bicycle safety bills through.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. Yeah, the primary focus has been allowing bicycles to ride two abreast, trying to get a yielded stop sign bill. And this year we also added to that what's called being able to go on a leading pedestrian indicator. Right. So when the walk lights come on before the street lights have changed, allowing motorized traffic to move.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to what was in the bill in a second. So in terms of, the past 30 years of VBF, what are some, accomplishments that VBF has done with the GA? And sorry for all the acronyms to people out there, but VBF, and then the GA is short for General Assembly if you're not here in Virginia and you're listening to this in Europe or something like that. It's our General Assembly. They meet and help pass bills in a nutshell. And John's typing up to look because I'm sure it's a lot of things you guys have done, but just to kind of give people an understanding of what VBF has helped with. And then we'll get into this Omnibike bill.
Yeah, let me just pull up because we'll be going to the League of American Bicycles, and so
that's the national.
National, and that starts getting into funding and so forth. But in there, I should have prepared an elevator speech.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I know you didn't know you were going to ask that. I just like to let people know kind of what you guys have, what VBF has kind of fought for, and they've had some wins over the years. I'm hoping.
Yeah, we have. And we got some wins this year.
Yeah.
So our canned speech here, we're a statewide advocacy organization working to change public policy and community attitudes to improve the safety, convenience, and acceptance of bicycling, promote bicycling for transportation, recreation, public health, and economic development.
Right.
And so, the bill, that we've been working on this year, it's really over a 5-year process. We've had steps forward and then we get steps back.
So we'll stop right there and talk about this bill then. What the bill over the past 5 years has been generally what you kind of mentioned. It's to do side by side, letting cyclists ride side by side and yield at a stop, meaning stop sign or stop light.
Only at a stop sign.
Stop sign, because I think people get confused about that.
Yeah, and that's a detail we can talk about in terms of what happened down there.
Yeah. So, and it's letting them do that. And you guys have been fighting for this or advocating for this for a number of years. And depending on who's in charge of the governor's mansion, I'm assuming, and who's in charge of the GA politically, either GOP or the Democrats, it kind of gets close and then it keeps getting push back. And the reason why I think this bill is important and what you guys do is important is, one, side by side allows drivers to see, hey, I need to slow down. There's two of them and we could slow down. You could add to that as well, but also the yield, which is the big stumbling block, I think, for a lot of people that want to vote against this, is it's commonly known as the Idaho stop. That's where it kind of originated. A lot of different states and localities. I think DC allows it. It allows a cyclist who has a wider peripheral vision to look ahead and say, hey, you know what? I could keep going at this stop sign. If I slow down, double check that there's no pedestrians, no other cars coming, I could keep going without stopping my momentum. And they could do that for a number of reasons. One, it's a pain in the butt to stop and restart your momentum. But two, say there's a car behind them and they want to get maybe up ahead past the stop sign out of the way where it's safer. There's a whole host of reasons, for this. So if you want to expand on maybe those two things of the stop and the other thing.
Yeah.
Or did I cover it pretty well?
No, you covered it very well. We should employ you as our lobbyist next year. So that would, but the safety yield, I would start with the fact that intersections are the most dangerous places for vulnerable users. Within Richmond, we've had, I think it's 7 pedestrian deaths in the last few months.
Right. It was 13 last year, and then in the last weeks of December into the new year, it spiked up again. And then even after when the new year started, there's been a number of, and it's not just people, people in social media just like to comment, oh, they're jaywalking. Oh, people in crosswalks, literally having the right of way to cross.
Absolutely. In those intersections, it's like a danger zone. And it's a danger zone for other vulnerable users such as cyclists also. If you go through, Richmond's put a lot of effort into increasing the number and providing some protection on bike lanes. And you're still confronted, a lot of folks will notice a lot of those bike lanes, they get to an intersection and you're left hanging out there. And so the safety yield, as you mentioned, would allow you to maintain your mobility while having slowed down and ascertained that it is safe to proceed. And we've worked a number of years on this and included protections such as a requirement to stop if you're making a turn or there's a pedestrian in the intersection. That it's very clear that the bicycle needs to stop for that pedestrian.
Right.
We also put in restrictions of it doesn't apply to street lights and it does not apply where there's multiple lanes of traffic. So it's a very well-crafted bill that has addressed issues that were raised over the years concerning this approach. And it's modeled after the Delaware safety yield, and Delaware had a 23% reduction in crashes in intersections after they put this bill in. And so that's the one component. And in terms of one of the things that we also had a restriction that children under the age of 15 would need to be accompanied by an adult for them to be able to just roll through. And so you take my case, I've got an 8-year-old grandson. This would allow me to ride with him, for me to be next to him or slightly in front and say, yeah, it's clear, and go through, and you're minimizing your time in that intersection and your vulnerability. And you mentioned too, there's a danger of you come to a complete stop and you have a car behind you, and far too often cyclists are hit by cars, either not anticipating them stopping, but also not anticipating how slow it is for them to get back up to speed.
Right. So very, very important distinctions there. It sounds like you guys have worked out some of the kinks over the years to try to please some of the lawmakers who were fighting this type of bill. And I think it's important to know, in terms of a social media aspect or in terms of people fighting things like this, they're under the stereotype that cyclists just, are all bike messengers from New York who ride through our state just willy-nilly on sidewalks and do, dangerous things left and right. And yes, there are cyclists who are out there who are not paying attention, who are not obeying the laws, who are not, modeling good behavior. But I'd like to say, for the most part, cyclists don't want to get hit. They don't want to get killed. They want to arrive to wherever they're going safely, and they want to be able to share the roads, which are open to all users, not just cars. So I think it's a really strong push in terms of what advocates like ourselves need to do, is to let people know, like, we're not all bike messenger people, or, people that just take biking in that kind of way where it's deemed as dangerous, because that's the first thing I always see on social media, and it drives me crazy. But so anyway, so I'm sorry, get off track. So you guys have fought, fine-tuned it enough to get it to pass. And so with this go around this year, like you said, you've been fighting it for about 5 years. It seemed to be off to a really good start, where everything I kept hearing was it kept going through. Explain the steps that it has to go through starting when the GA starts.
Sure. Well, before the General Assembly started, we worked with a patron, Delegate Willett from Henrico County, and formulated the bill and what we wanted to have in the bill. It then goes to Legislative Services, and they come back with language. And the language is reviewed and filed, and there are timelines in terms of you need to get it in before a certain date to get filed, and then you can file legislation after that date, but it takes longer.
And I'll
just not as much visibility.
And I'll stop you there for a quick, brief interjection, I guess. There's so many bills going through the General Assembly that people need to know it's not just this one bill. There's a ton of bills, and that's why the language has to get set. And there's a whole
about 3,000. There's about 3,000 bills, 3,500 bills, somewhere in that range.
So
they are truly drinking from a fire hydrant. And our bill, while it covered several aspects of cycling, it was limited to within cycling, very narrow in focus from that standpoint, and it was just within one section of code. But once you've got the bill introduced, it then is referred to a committee, and in our case, it was in the House of Delegates and was referred to Transportation. And we were heard in Transportation, and we passed the Transportation Committee with a unanimous vote. And so,
which, by the way, I'm sorry to keep cutting you out, but I want people to know that, unanimous doesn't always happen when you're in these committees as well. So, and then those committees are open to the general public to go listen to it. And I don't know if there's a public comment or not. You could tell me if there is, but generally having something like that pass unanimously is kind of not unheard of, but it's worth noting.
Agreed. And another bill that we should talk about in comparison, and this bill was carried by Betsy Carr. What it did was allow the state to adopt the federal regulations that provide for bicycle-specific signals. And so that bill, biggest example would be if you're on the cycle track on Franklin Street and you're heading west going against traffic. Right now, as a cyclist on there, you see a little sign that says for bicycles to use the pedestrian walk light. And that walk light is actually probably, most cases, 5 or more feet off to your right, because it's designed for the pedestrians in the walk lane, not the cyclotrack. And this bill would allow construction like that to use a bicycle-specific signal. And that bill, we worked closely with VDOT and went through multiple iterations to come up with language for that bill. And when it went through committee, there were some no votes, surprisingly. And when it went to the floor, also it was like 84 to 13. So there were no votes on that bill, which was quite frankly surprising. Yeah. It went over to the Senate and has passed both the House and the Senate at this point. And there wasn't any opposition in the Senate. But the bicycle safety bill went entirely through the House with no votes. And what happens is once you've come out of committee with no votes, they put you into a block and it's read on the floor 3 times. And if there's no opposition, nobody's saying, hey, I want to talk about this bill, or I think we should have a vote on this bill by itself. Those bills are all voted in block. And so, that tells you the level of support on the House side, that no one felt a concern there.
And so the big bike bill on that one, it went through in that block vote and passed. So things were looking pretty good, but what happened?
things continued to look pretty good. And we went to the Transportation Committee, and in that committee, there was a question about electric bikes. And in terms of the whole interview, we probably should spend some time discussing electric bikes.
Yeah, that's a whole other.
That's a whole topic, but it comes into, do you have the currently classified and legal electric bikes? We also have a number of illegal, much faster bikes they're electric, but they're more the equivalent of mini bikes or
Right.
illegal motorcycles.
Right. They don't. I saw something today that said on social media, and someone was talking about an e-bike, and someone said if it doesn't have pedals, it's not an e-bike. It's like an electric motorcycle, basically.
Yeah, we've taken to calling them e-motos,
Yeah.
and that is going to be an important topic for at least the next year, if not the next several years. There have been a bill passed New Jersey that went all the way through that it essentially requires a licensing, and it's a very onerous bill
Yeah.
that has a lot of impacts. And there was a session in Virginia, there was a bill that was sincerely trying to address the problem. And it had a lot of issues with it because it's a complicated problem and requires a fair amount of thought. And fortunately, the bill caught our scanning of what was going through. We were able to meet with that delegate, and he was very receptive. Rides an e-bike himself and worked with us. His bill ended up being gently laid on the table with his agreement and was rolled into a study bill
Right.
that
And
has
for
made it
those-
through the legislature to deal with this entire issue.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, the lingo laid on the table means it's going to be studied, so nothing doesn't go forward.
Yeah, it
Anymore.
stops it.
So it kind of stops it. And that, the whole e-bike, e-moto, which I think really needs to be a good distinction, that it's, an e-moto is a totally different thing. And I feel in hearing a lot of these stories, and I still want to get back to the bill, but I feel like e-moto bikes are ruining the progress that is trying to be made for cyclists, and e-bikes, which are a great way to get around for a lot of people on an e-bike. So they're not, again, I fear that they're turning into a stereotype where people are going to think every e-bike is an e-moto bike, and people are just trying to take advantage of, these quick little speedsters, when in fact they like pedal assist. There's a whole host of reasons why people use these bikes. So with the bill, the big bike bill, great success getting through everything. So what kind of happened? Where did it stall in finance, or what?
And this is where, in transportation, we had a senator from Northern Virginia, and she raised the e-bike issue, and it became, from her discussion, she brought up being buzzed. It really looked like it was going into the e-moto realm, not someone riding a class 1 e-bike that it goes up to not quite 20 miles an hour and is strictly pedal assist.
Right.
And so in there, we addressed that issue, and she voted yes for the bill in committee. But I think the raising of that question had the committee, and this is where I apologize, but part of the bill in going through the House, they also did a financial impact assessment, and the financial impact assessment said, is the state going to have to spend any money? And their determination was that they would need to do some assessment of intersections for the leading pedestrian indicator, but that could be handled within their current existing processes, and so it wasn't going to require additional money, but that generated a financial impact statement. And so over in the Senate, they said, well, they passed it out of committee 13-1, and the one vote was out of Southwest Virginia, and that was from a Republican senator who just philosophically said a stop sign should mean a stop sign no matter what. There were other Republicans who voted wholeheartedly for the bill, two of whom I met, and when I explained the bill to them, they were like, absolutely, we will vote and support this bill. And so, but in there, being referred to Senate Finance, it was there. We became prepared to address the financial impact, and our patron addressed that. And in finance, the head of that committee said, well, there were some e-bike questions about this bill, and we've talked about riding two abreast in the past, and they killed the bill. It was over like in a minute.
Wow.
With no discussion. And so, I mean, to me, it would appear that within that committee, what they were going to do on this bill and a number of other bills, they decided before they came into the room.
Yeah. And that was again in the Finance Committee.
Yes, Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee.
And so now the bill is it dead on arrival? I mean, we've already had what's called a hump day or whatever, where it's crossover day. Sorry.
Oh yeah, this is well after. Yeah, this is well after crossover.
And for those who don't know, crossover day is you have bills in the House, and then it goes over to the Senate, and they vote on the same thing. So it's already gone through that. So now is it dead on arrival? And
what they did was trying to think of the technical term for it, but they essentially laid it over to say, oh, we'll look at it again in the next year. But that's essentially, it's dead for this year.
Wow.
And
it's really frustrating to think that after all the work, and I'm sad to say you guys are sort of used to it, I guess, after fighting for this for, 5 years, that with this year in particular being so well received in all the different committees and by all the different votes, that one committee, the Finance Committee, could just put a stop to it.
And I agree. And for anyone interested in our state government and democracy and how that works, I would encourage them to look at some recent tweets from Delegate Lucas.
Louisa,
yeah. And because she basically complained about having to kill bills in finance and about committee chairs.
So then,
but that's in there. I mean, there's clearly an element within our General Assembly that is somewhat of a black hole or hard to understand. But I also would want to very much make the point that in terms of going down there, and we had our own bill, we had the bicycle safety lights bill, and then we also spent a fair amount of time monitoring and speaking up for speed camera and other safety bills out there in that regard. And there was another bill that dealt with bicycles and intersections that I want to talk about on there, and the whole e-moto bill, which we kind of talked on. But my observation is that, the General Assembly one, everybody, when you go down there, they're all very helpful and polite, and the process itself is much more accessible to folks than I would have thought. And so I would encourage all of our listeners to get involved and help promote bike safety and work with us or other groups to promote vulnerable user safety down at the legislature, because there are a number of good delegates and senators that are very sincere in what they're trying to accomplish, and I was very impressed with the overall process, despite being kind of blindsided at the end on our own bill.
So on your own bill, then what happens next in terms of, do you guys just see what you could do again for the next General Assembly session?
We're assessing that. And part of I'd say the big challenge for us is, we're all volunteer, and the depth and breadth of what it takes. Like even today I learned, that their influence of staff within some of these committees. We talked to as many delegates and senators as we could. We didn't talk to them all, but really the more support we have from the public, and the more, particularly folks in Richmond, where we can go down and meet with folks, will help for future success. So I think that what happened this year is very disappointing, but it's not going to deter the effort or the move further progress. And substantively, I think that the bill that we went forth, there's nothing about that bill where we're saying we should have not had this part, or we should have put in this word, or anything like that. Yeah. That's not to say that in the future the language may not change a little bit, but that we're not looking at the bill and saying, okay, we got something wrong within the language of the bill or how we approached it. I would say the only limitation would be you can only, in that short period of time, without broader depth in terms of who can go, you can only talk to so many people.
All right. So, John, I'm going to end this section.
Okay.
I'm going to thank you and end it, and then talk to you really quickly about something else. So let me do an ending, and I'll edit this. I don't know why I just did that. I'll edit this.
Okay.
So, John Hamilton, I really appreciate you taking the time to explain to us what the big bike bill was and what happened to it, and all the other issues facing cyclists and pedestrians too, in not only the Richmond area but in the state. I want to hear more about the e-motos on another podcast, because I feel like we could talk a whole other chunk. Let me try that again, because I feel like we could talk again at a greater length of what's going on with e-bikes and e-moto bikes. But thanks for explaining what was going on in the General Assembly.
Okay, thanks so much, Ian.
John, go ahead. I was going to say, tell me some of the success that VBF, Virginia Bicycle Federation, I don't know why I always mess it up, but VBF has had in this General Assembly session. So there's been some, besides the one that just died.
Yeah. I mean, we're very proud to have worked with Delegate Carr and gotten through the bicycle safety. Not bicycle, oh God. Yeah. Going to have to do it. Bicycle signal faces. And in the federal code, there's a MUTCD, and that code regulates stop signs, street lights, everything to do with anything around streets. And they include within it bicycle signals and a signage that goes with that. And the state felt that they adopt this code, but they did not adopt that section because they felt they needed legislation to be able to do so. And so we were able to work with VDOT and the delegate, come up with language that got a bill through that the most important aspect locally that would come up would be on this Franklin Street when you're heading west, being able to have bicycle signals on that at some point in the future.
And to let people know, it's for the entire state, not just for Richmond, but so this will help cyclists. And to summarize it, it's basically if you're on a bike lane and you're coming up to a light, you will eventually see one for bikes letting you know when to go, just like they do for the GRTC for buses when it's strictly a bus light that lets the bus driver know, hey, it's good for me to go, or the drivers see a red light, they need to stop, or a green light. So bikes will have kind of their own doohickey.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the other success that we had, there was a bill that was carried that would have allowed bicycles to roll through both stop signs and street lights without slowing down, as long as they did not crash in. If there was no crash, there was harm, no foul. So that would have allowed them, if the speed limit on a street was 45 and there was a stop sign, you could go through at 45 and not slow down. We were able to convince the patron of that bill to drop her bill and sign on to the bicycle safety bill after several meetings. Realized that our bill was the more responsible bill in terms of promoting that. We, on the whole e-bike, e-moto issue, we were able to work with a patron of a well-intended but very complicated bill that would have had ramifications for e-bike riders, such as having to get licenses, having to put tags on their bikes, wear motorcycle helmets for the Class 3, and get through a bill to study that entire issue. Right. That patron dropped his bill and became a co-patron on the study bill.
So they're studying. So now this session or next session, they'll be studying, or throughout the year, they'll be studying this e-moto versus e-bike, and let them figure out why one needs a license and a little more regulation versus another one that is strictly a bicycle assist.
Absolutely.
Like a cargo.
Yeah, and the intention, we hope to be involved in that. And the intention is to have responsible legislation and recognize the true value of e-bikes used every day by folks for transportation.
Right. It's a good thing, I guess, because of these e-motorbikes that are now just prevalent in a lot of places that are not getting regulated or looked at or anything, and are getting lumped in with e-bikes. Just because it has an electric motor, we want to make sure people know there's a difference. So, I mean, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. It is.
All right.
Okay.
Well, there you go.
Thanks. Okay.
You've been nerding out about bike legislation that passed and failed during this General Assembly session. Be sure to like and subscribe and share the show and tip your server if you can. On Venmo, I'm at Ian-Stewart-82, where you can buy me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Ian_Stewart. And if you're a sponsor who'd like to sponsor the show, then let me know. Thanks. And be sure to check out my other podcast called History Reinvented, which covers the history and future of places in the city, including Mayo Bridge and Island and the area known as Pine Camp in Richmond, Virginia. And if you like music, check out Ian's World Music Show. For 17 years, I had a world music show on a local public radio station. And look for a new podcast coming soon, which will feature all my archival interviews with musicians including Angelique Kidjo, Jack Johnson, Los Lobos, and so many more. Plus, you could also look for my freelance work on outlets like Virginia Mercury, The Richmonder, Richmond Magazine, and on the podcast Full Disclosure with Robin Farzad. The Mechanics of Transportation is a Big Soap production. I'm Ian Stewart. Thanks for tagging along.